I thought let's introduce, I say introduce, everybody knows the legend Imam Abu Hanifa. Wow. Because what, it's a name that we hear so often about, but simultaneously, maybe some people ain't so familiar with the great Imam. And I thought maybe I could speak on different occasions about different Imams and introduce them to you. Right. So, Imam Abu Hanifa, that's his kunya, by the way, Abu Hanifa. And some people, they become more popular. They like a kunya and they use that as a name. So, Abu Hanifa is a prime example, like Abu Huraira from the companions, radiallahu anhu, Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu. These were not their names, these became their names. Like it's a kunya Abu something. Abu Yusuf, Abu Hanifa's student. So you get people, Abu Layth. I use a kunya as a name. So some people, a kunya is, it's an adopted name. And Imam Abu Hanifa, his actual name was Nu'man ibn Thabit, ibn Marzaban, ibn Marzuban. Oh, I'm twisted. And Ibn Marzaban, yeah, I believe it's Marzaban. Yeah, so his ancestry was, he was of Persian ancestry. He was born in 80 Hijri, so that's about 70 years after the Prophet ﷺ. He was from the either the lower end of the Tabi'een or from the upper end of the Tabi'een, those who come after the Tabi'een. So you have the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet, then you have those who come after Tabi'een. So he's either from them or from the Tabi'een who come after them. His parents and his grandparents are the ones who embraced Islam. I believe in the time of some people say in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu an, or some people say in the time of Ali radiallahu an, but they were from a wealthy background and they embraced Islam, and they were originally from Kabul in modern day Afghanistan. So I don't know whether that makes them Pathan. Maybe, I don't know, but or maybe more Farsi speak, but I don't know, because he spoke Farsi, so I guess, but I don't know whether back then, so you got to go back, you see, at least over 1300 years ago. So at that stage, I don't know whether Pashto was developed or not. But yeah, so he was from his ancestry was from Kabul. His grandparents moved towards Iraq and so on. They embraced Islam. He himself is born in Kufa in the year 80 Hijri. Some people say that there's a myth that his grandparents served a gift to, they were great hospitable people, and they served a gift to Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, who made dua for them. This is something as well. Look, one, it's something, try to give gifts to people. And also, if you receive something nice, try to make a dua for someone. And try to gift the gift of dua to someone. You see, it doesn't cost you anything to make a dua. May Allah bless you. May Allah keep you smiling. May Allah, fill your life with happiness. I mean, it costs nothing. Why do we struggle to say this to someone? It's because it's something in ourselves. Disease of the heart, man. So, yeah, so people say that and there's some stories that, like Faluda, there's, I don't know whether it's the same Faluda, but there was an old dessert known as Faludaj. And some people say the grandparents served that of Abu Hanifa to Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anh, who in turn made dua, may Allah bless your family or something. And they say that, as a consequence of this dua, you have the legend of Imam Abu Hanifa in that family. But he was born in the year 80 Hijri. He grew up in a well-to-do family that was from a trading background. His father was also a trader. Usually, I suppose there were many different trades, but they were into cloth and fabric and textiles, that kind of trade. And Imam Abu Hanifa didn't actually grow up inclined towards Islamic knowledge and that kind of stuff. He wasn't a part of those circles. So obviously he was a Muslim. I'm not saying I'm sure he was a great Muslim, but he was just a normal Muslim. He was a businessman. That he wasn't a scholar of Islam who used to go to circles. And some people say he memorized the Quran as a kid. But I guess in that day and age, many people memorized the Quran as children. But he wasn't inclined. He grew up. He was a young man. He was into business. He was doing well, very well in business. And they say, he would wear the most expensive of clothes, very stylish clothes, even right through his imamship. He always maintained that style. He would often wear, like dapper clothing and dashing style he had, and he would be very innovative with his fashion sense. Now, they say one day he, as a young man, so I'm not sure what, arguably in his maybe 20s, which was quite, it was quite an age, because back then people weren't, those who got into seeking Islamic knowledge got into it when they were just maybe from the age of 10. So this is now you're fully developed, you're a grown man, you're a businessman, you're thriving. He was walking through in Iraq once, and he walks past Sha'bi, the great tabi'i. And he was a great Imam, has his own madhab, very well known, Sha'bi. And he walks past him, and Sha'bi says to him, he looks at Sha'bi, and Sha'bi looks at him, and he says salam, and he calls him. And Abu Hanifa, who at that time he's just Nu'man, walks up to him, and Sha'bi asks him, "Ila man takhtalif?" Like, who do you hang out with? Where do you hang out? So he says, "Akhtalifu ila al-aswaq." He says, "I hang out in the marketplaces." Businessman. So he goes, he says, "Lam as'alka an hadha." He says, I didn't ask you about this. I asked you which of the halaqat of ilm, which of the academic ilmi circles do you hang out with? And he says, La. He says, La akhtalif ila hadi al-halaqat. He says, I akhtalifu ila al-aswaq. I go to the markets, I trade, that's what I do. So Sha'bi looks at him, and he discerns, there is something. Some people, they have a gift of reading you. They can see something in you and about you. And he says to him, he says, make it your business to go to those circles. He says, for I see in you a brilliance, an extraordinary future. Like, I see in you this light. And these words, they struck Abu Hanifa quite strangely, and he went off. He couldn't shake them off, and then he thinks, you know what? Okay, let's go to these circles. But this becomes the beginning of an absolute new life-changing adventure for who was Nu'man ibn Thabit into becoming this metamorphosis into this legendary Imam Abu Hanifa. Right. So, and the journey begins there, and he brings with it, we had this quote earlier today, which said that, I'll try and bring it back up. Right. So you can see it there. All right. Just as I bring it, it goes. Right. So, ya salam. Right. So this, I'm trying to, there it is. I'm trying to press pause. It just doesn't pause. That's better. Finally does. Right. So it said, blessed are those, you see, and it speaks about that are the curious, for they will have adventures. Now, this is it, because you know, a curious mind, it brings something that's just unmatchable. So Imam Abu Hanifa brought this mind that was on fire. He brought a soul, you know, he set his soul aflame with the love of this ilm of Islam. And he starts, they say the first thing he started learning about, some people say it's aqaid or ilm al-kalam and other things. Then he got into fiqh, he got into tafsir, he studied all the, and he became this legend of an individual. And so renowned, his as the years went by, his reputation just, it spread like wildfire. He had studied, he studied under many people, but he keenly took the tutelage of a great sheikh of Iraq, Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman. And there's another Hamad as well, Ibn Abi Salma, but this was Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, great muhaddith, but also faqih, Hanafi, student of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. And you can see that who's a student of Aswad and the other great early Iraqis who are a student of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu an. So you see this legacy coming down. Now, after Hamad had passed away, Imam Abu Hanifa became that central figure in Kufa. There were other people, by the way, in Kufa. He wasn't like this. There were people like Sufyan al-Thawri, there was Ibn Abi Layla, there was a bunch of people in Kufa. But Imam Abu Hanifa, you know, his reputation spread, because Hamad was so huge and he was a key student of Hamad, and then he carries this torch after, and he loved Hamad so much that he named his own son Hamad. Abu Hanifa's son is named Hamad. And yeah, so, and he becomes what he sets into motion, or not sets into motion really, but he concretizes this school which becomes known as Ahlul Ra'i, the school of reason. And he was a legendary voice for the voice of reason. Honestly, a legend. And it's so inspiring. And you know something they say about Imam Abu Hanifa, that he, you see, he had this charm. And I mentioned before, he had this epic, everybody, even centuries after him, they would cite his fashion sense. And you may say, well, what's so special about fashion? You know, it's of the world. But you have to remember how Imam Malik said. He said that as a person of knowledge, you become a symbol to people. And this is why Imam Malik often worked on his physique. And they say he had a strong physique. And he would eat every single day. Imam Malik would eat a certain portion of meat for his protein. And when asked, he said it's important because it helps with the posture and it helps with your physique and stature, which then has an impact when people meet you and are in your presence. So similarly, these things they did play a role. And they say that in his day and age, there was something about long sleeves that had become a new fashion. And Imam Abu Hanifa would often have these kind of things. But I guess with notoriety, you get as well hate. And Imam Abu Hanifa was subjected to an immense amount of hate as well. A lot of people hated on him. There was a lot of false propaganda about him. People said, you know, his Islam is made up. They said his Islam is just based on desires. His Islam, everything's halal according to Abu Hanifa. You know, they had this kind of thing about him, that he uses his reason, that he uses his opinions, that he would speak of. So this thing of Imam Abu Hanifa, if you read the early criticisms of the scholars that were all in his day and age and just after him that were hurling criticism, it's full of all of this. that they would say, oh, he's just, he's just absorbed in fashion. He doesn't, it's just all about opinion, personal opinion. He just uses reason over the Quran. He's a deviant. Everything is permitted according to him. He doesn't declare things haram. He doesn't, all this it's so interesting that when you read it, it's like, wow, nobody would think that now, because he's this legendary Imam now. But in his day and age, he was given he had a lot of love, but there was a lot of hate as well. But something, the thing about him is, okay, some of the hate came to him from maybe certain voices that were maybe rivals and things like Sufyan al-Thawri, who's a great Imam, but he often hated on Imam Abu Hanifa, which wasn't really, a good thing, to be honest. But khair, I guess things happen. And they lived in the same town as well, so the rivalry was quite bitter. But Imam Abu Hanifa, as far as I'm aware, didn't really diss him to, as in, I'm sure he maybe joked about, but I don't think he. I've not ever read Imam Abu Hanifa being venomous about others. I've heard others being venomous about him. Similarly, you see with Imam Malik. Now, Imam Malik's a bit different because everybody respected Imam Malik. He's this. Imam Malik is one where even those who didn't disrespect him, Allah forced the love of Imam Malik in their heart. So they couldn't, there's just this thing about Imam Malik. He was on another maqam. But him and obviously Abu Hanifa, see, even when they criticize each other, that but they keep it reasonably, they're always respectful, dignified. Imam Malik also felt that, his opinions weren't, they missed the mark, but he didn't disrespect him. Like he did say that, he said, Ra'aytu rajulan hu ilmun wa fahm. Said, I met a man who had great understanding and knowledge. But he says, Lo bana ala asl. If only he built on a firm foundation. Imam Malik, legends. I'll tell you something. There was this time where all these Imams got together. Wow. And just imagine if you could be a fly on the wall. So it's in the Prophet's mosque. They all got together. You had Imam Malik, Imam Abu Hanifa, you had Imam Awza'i, you had Layth ibn Sa'ad, and I believe you also had Sufyan Thawri. I'm not so sure whether it was Sufyan or it was Abdullah ibn Mubarak, but there was these top four. I mean, these were the heavyweights of the world. Awza'i, Allah, Layth ibn Sa'ad, wow, Malik, Abu Hanifa, wow. And they just really sat there and just discussed. They just sat there for hours talking to each other. It's beautiful. Honestly, just knowing that they met, it excites me. Allah. And it's interesting that afterwards they asked Imam Malik, what do you think? Because Imam Malik was the Don of Medina. He's the Imam Udar al-Hijra. He's the legend, isn't he? So they asked Imam Malik afterwards, what did you think of him? He says, he says that if he wanted to debate you that this pillar was made out of gold, he would do it and he would win. Meaning that the pillar isn't made out of gold, but he would still, not only would he, if he wanted to debate you on it, would he do it, but he would win. It's very sharp. You see, Imam Abu Hanifa was so quick-witted. This was the thing about him. And and the thing, so his wit, so you have many cases in his day and age, many people would come to him where they would be stuck in religious things and he would find loopholes for them. And now some people criticize this. They said that why was he finding loopholes? And, and this is why his student Muhammad, he also has a book, Kitab al-Hiyal, a book of loopholes, these kind of legal loopholes. Now, you see, so they're seeing it as always a loophole, as in you're trying to. But Imam Abu Hanifa wasn't seeing it like that. You see, he was seeing it as that he was seeing it like that I'm helping people I'm welcoming them and creating ease for them in this faith. That this faith is not rigid. I'm facilitating that they fall in love with Islam. This was his way, that he would often, his fatwa were things like, he used to say, Imam Abu Hanifa's fatwas were, if a person struggled with Arabic, he could read Salah in Persian, Farsi. He could, if a person never knew, a lot of his fatwas are like that. They're like, well, oh, if you don't know this, just say this. If you don't know that, just say takbir. If you don't know this, you could do. A lot of his fatwa are just about making ease and ease and ease. And people, obviously, they took it the wrong way and they weaponized it against him, tried to say, oh my God, he said, oh, you could, you could pray in Farsi, you could pray in Persian. Khuda buzurg ast. Allahu Akbar, Khuda buzurg ast. But he was, you see, it's not, it's not, they missed the mark, like they're missing the point. He wasn't trying to say change Islam. He was trying to make it easy for them. People, not everybody in his day and age spoke well Arabic. A lot of people, remember, it's the early Tabi'een era. A lot of people are embracing Islam. It's the Umayyad era. And he was trying to create ease for them. You can still pray. Don't worry, when you learn it, then do it. Right now, you only know Farsi, do it in Farsi. There's honestly, there's so much to admire about the Imam. And I feel in many ways his spirit is the same spirit that is needed in this day and age. Yeah, and he did get into, he found himself in some difficult times, at least on two, he at least found himself in two major inquisitions. Okay, a victim of, one was in the time of Bani Umayyah and then one Bani al-Abbas. And that's his, Imam Abu Hanifa's political side. Because even though he himself didn't rise up in politics, but he took a stance to support, or he gave, he stood in solidarity with the political, so the uprising, so the Ahlul Bayt, the family of the Prophet. See, because in Bani Umayyah's time, the issues of Bani Umayyah and the family of the Prophet, and then there was the rising of Zayd ibn Ali, the son of Zayn al-Abidin, Imam Zayd, where the Zaydiyya Shia kind of stem from. And there was that uprising, and Imam Abu Hanifa, this is what is written, is that he supported Imam Zayd's movement against Bani Umayyah, and he got into a lot of trouble for this, and he had to he fled Iraq and he came to Mecca for quite some while, and I mean he moved around, and then he went back, but he he faced some persecution. But then this was in the time of Hisham ibn Abdul Malik. So Bani Umayyah are then after that quite weak anyway. And and they say, I think in 130 Hijri, he fled Kufa. And then it's only around that time, 131 Hijri, Bani al-Abbas take over. The Abbasids take over. So he comes back. And then he gets into trouble later on with the Abbasids. But you see, the Abbasids, they did recognize the respect of Imam Abu Hanifa. On one hand, they did. They clearly, a lot of people don't know this, but Abu Ja'far al-Mansur commissioned, when he was making Baghdad, he commissioned Abu Hanifa to be the chief, what would you call it today? You'd call it like the project manager. He was the chief project manager of when they were constructing Baghdad for 4 years. He was supervising the project. I mean, these weren't just these were very not intelligent, accomplished individuals. They were huge. And remember, by this time, he is Imam Abu Hanifa. He's not just Nu'man ibn Thabit. And he has many students, many countless students. Notably, you have Abu Yusuf, also known by his kunya. Yaqub ibn Ibrahim is his name, but he's known as Abu Yusuf. One of his main students, Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, who actually just studied with Imam Abu Hanifa for only, I think, maybe 2 years, if that. But he transmits the books in the madhab, the main books from the Imam, which are known as Zahir or Riwayat. There are 6 books. They are all written by Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani. He's the real voice of the Hanafi madhab that tries, that starts setting the institution into motion. As in, because in Imam Abu Hanifa's time, it's more a spirit. It's not the letter. It's not structured. It's not an institution. After him, the institution begins really with the likes of Imam Muhammad, Imam Abu Yusuf. You do have also people like Zufar. Zufar is actually a senior student of Imam Abu Hanifa, but delegated to the 3rd position, where really, in many ways, that's another discussion. Should he be number 1 or how should he be? But Allahu A'lam. I think Sheikh Atabek has some interesting points on that. But then he had many other students as well. Hassan ibn Zayyad, Al-Lu'lu'i. These are the main students. But the books get documented really by Imam Muhammad. He has this top collection known as the Zahir al-Riwayat, the apparent transmission. That's what it's called. And they are his major book, the Asl or the Mabsut. Then you have his Jami' al-Kabir, Jami' al-Saghir, Sir al-Kabir, Sir al-Saghir, and his Ziyadat. These 6 texts are the mother texts of the madhab, of the transmissions from Imam Imam Abu Hanifa. I believe that they are over 100,000 issues in them, 100,000 masail. These then get summarized by what's his name? By Sheikh Abu al-Fadl Hakim al-Shahid al-Marwazi in his book Al-Kafi, which is then expanded on by Shamsul Aimma Sarakhsi in his Mabsut. So that's how these transmissions get transmitted. But that's the madhab. You see, I always feel there's a difference between Imam Abu Hanifa and his madhab. That's a different discussion, for another day. Hamari kuch rai hai. We have an opinion on that. Maybe people agree with it, maybe they don't. I feel that his madhab kind of along the way, as the generations went by, they lost that spirit, and the more centuries that went by, it became radically kind of institutionalized. And as Dr. Sherman Jackson says in his from the States, he has this term that there's the crypto Shafization of the madhab. So they become kind of crypto Shafis, with it apparently Hanafis, but they switch because the spirit of the madhab changes. It becomes all about the letter of the law. It's all about most things become haram. Most things are very, and I suppose they've got their justifications. They're saying that's the reason, but it's very opposite to the spirit that Imam Abu Hanifa brought. He brought this trying to welcome everyone and never say things are, very reluctant to say things are haram, very trying to create ease. Oh, you're struggling with this. Well, why don't you pray in Farsi? Oh, you're doing this. Why don't you just do it like that? To the extent that they said, well, if a person was struggling to make wudu, he couldn't find water. See, in that day and age, people, you might be in a place you can't find water. You see, water in the past, it's interesting because today water is just on tap, so it's everywhere. But in the past, it's not. I mean, obviously people had water, but sometimes when people were traveling and doing things, they may take certain fermented drinks because it was less likely to have bacteria in it, and it's actually more healthy. So this is why, for example, the Roman soldiers they would drink beer as opposed to water, because obviously the beer had a very low alcohol content, but because it was less likely to contain germs. Whereas if you just drank water, chances are it's not like water today. Water in the past, some of it would have just led to infections and it could have been infested. And I'm not saying all water, but I'm just saying that and it's true, Islam it kind of forced people to say, well, no, we're going to move away from this whole fermented uh, alternatives. And therefore, Muslims had to, necessity is the mother of invention. So they had to invent all these aqueducts and bring water in and do all of that. So that, which was great. But in his time, you might have had people that have nabith, which is a very low content kind of, almost like a beer kind of. No, except nabith would be from really dates. So I don't know whether you'd call that a beer, but it was like a fermented date drink. So it probably had very low alcohol content, like maybe, I don't know, 1% or, something like that. So it wasn't that alcoholic, but it would have had some alcoholic content, but it wasn't haram according to the Hanafi madhab, because it's a tiny amount of, it's negligible. So that kind of tiny percentage of alcohol, of ethanol, you see, we say alcohol, ethanol is not, it's negligible according to that madhab. I know the Hanafis have disagreed, but according to the early school anyway. So Imam Abu Hanifa's fatwa would have been, look, if you couldn't find water, you could do wudu with nabith. You can take this fermented thing and just do wudu with it. Like, look, creating ease for people. And a lot of people would come to the Imam when they were stuck, and he would help them find a way out. And, in that day and age as well, people as well, they're stupid problems, because they would self-inflicted. People would take all these qasams, and they would say things like, they would say things like, oh, if I do this, then my wife's divorced. Or if that happens, my wife's divorced. On every other thing their wives did. They're stuck. They'd come to the likes of Imam Abu Hanifa. See, because the likes of Imam Malik were very different. Imam Malik was also a voice of reason, but he had like zero tolerance for, if a person came like this, oh, I said this about my wife, I said this divorce. Imam Malik, he wouldn't be entertaining it. He wouldn't even be, he wouldn't be part of that conversation. He would just be gone. And he would be like, don't ever disturb me again for your stupidity. Imam Malik was he had a more serious tone to him. Imam Abu Hanifa was more a very jolly, exuberant, like people's person. And you could see this coming back to his trade and businessman kind of, because that's how he grew up. He was a very successful businessman. So so people would approach him. He would help them. He would say, well, okay, do this. This is this is how it can be. And people did, they rated his brilliance for really doing stuff like that. There's there's an incident. I'll share some stories with you guys, right? So I think I shared this one before once. They say that in his time in Kufa once, this couple were getting married. So sometimes let's say you had a friend or a relative, or even it could have been a dear friend, or could have been a cousin, or it could have been someone, and to save expenses, or maybe just to make it more extravagant, you might have a combined wedding, as in, I'm getting married, you're getting married, why don't we both get married on Sunday, and that way we could pool our resources together, and it could be even better, And so people sometimes did stuff like this. So you had this joint marriage going on, so two people marrying, two couples. So when it comes to the zifaf in Arabic is the kind of what they call in Urdu the rukhsati, where the bride is kind of, she goes with the groom, and usually, and in Arabic they're not so sensitive about sexual matters, so they're very clear that zifaf is about going and sex or love making, shall we say. They're very clear. They're not like, obviously in Urdu these kind of words are very, nobody uses words like that. They just say, it's just this. But in Arabic they'll say it very clearly. It's about bina, and it's about dukhul, and it's about sexual intimacy for the couple. So right, so zifaf, so after this this whole kind of do whatever they have in the wedding. It's the zifaf time. But people, ghalti se mistake ho gaya. There's a mistake, man. The wives are sent to the wrong, mistaken homes. So they send this wife to that home and that wife to that home. So obviously in that day and age as well, you see, sometimes people hadn't seen their husbands and wives properly. Like they didn't know, arranged marriages. They just knew, okay, it's that person. I haven't seen him, and they just accepted it. So now they end up, and obviously, right number, wrong door, number next door. They're like, well, chalo, so they get on with it. They harmonize, the souls, as the souls gel together. There's a music of a harmony of the souls. So they had their kind of harmonization, and they spent their Laylat al-Zifaf in a state of bliss with one another. What happens is the next morning, one of them realizes, wait a minute, you're not so and so. Kya naam bataya tha? What name did you say? Yeah, that's not the name I got married to. I got married to this. So they realize, what the hell? Are you sure? No, it wasn't. Wait a minute. You're meant to be marrying the other guy who we had a joint wedding. So, damn. So they've realized, oh, this is a great disaster. So obviously both couples find out. They like, what the hell? Get the masterminds together. So they call upon the great imams of the city, of the town, to come fix it. So this is in Kufa. So they call the likes of Sufyan al-Thawri, other imams. They call Imam Abu Hanifa. So they turn up and they say, look, we've got this problem. And so they're thinking, and they're in this room, they're having a conference. And so Sufyan al-Thawri, he says, okay, he says, look, listen, he says, I'll tell you what to do. So they say, what shall we do? So they say, what you do is, he says, each husband divorces his wife. And when he's divorced her, they wait an iddah, which is going to be 3 menstrual cycles, let's say, just to make sure they're not pregnant. And then the other original husband can, do the nikah with them. And again, just for the sake of, and they can remarry. Okay, so this is what, and then whilst he's saying this, he says, I heard from such and such of the Salaf, of the predecessors, that there was a case a bit similar to a different case, but it had some similarity, and this is what such and such ruled, and so on. So, Imam Sufyan al-Thawri says this, and he's quite happy with his answer. He looks around, and people are like, wah, 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 Imam Sufyan. But then he looks over there and he can see Imam Abu Hanifa not so impressed. Legend. So he looks at him and he thinks, why have you got that look on your face? And he says, what's up with you? And he says, he's just thinking. He says, have you got a better opinion? He says, do you agree with what I'm saying? So Imam Abu Hanifa goes, he just makes a face. He says, well, have you got anything better? So Imam Abu Hanifa says, if I may. He says, please, Irshad, please. He says, my suggestion. He says, before I suggest anything, I want you to bring the grooms here and also call upon the wives to come as well. So first of all, the grooms come because they're there anyway. And he asks them, he says, look, okay, put this, mistake aside. He says, how were you with, the partner that you ended up with? How did you find your evening? How did you find the person? Did you gel well? Were there issues, friction? They say, look, no, it was mistaken, but otherwise we got on really well, They say, a bit of romance, a bit of this one. Sometimes it's okay, this one. So he says that, they say, and he asked the other guy, he says, yeah, look, we got on really well, but obviously we found out in the morning it was, mistaken identity. He says, okay, hang on. So he waits for the women to come and he says, let's ask them. So he sends somebody to ask them in private that, how did you put the mistake aside, how do you feel about the person you ended up with? Were they okay? And they say, yeah, they're fine. I like them. There's nothing wrong with them. It's mistaken identity. So Imam Abu Hanifa says, in that case, I suggest that each one of you divorces his original wife. And you do a nikah here, right now, in our presence with the wife you ended up with. And you can move right in straight away with her, because the iddah, in case she's pregnant, let's say, is from you. So because it's the iddah is from you, there's no need to wait. There's no grace period, because even if there is a pregnancy, it's your child. And that way, none of you will have anything in your heart about the other person, because you might think, bloody hell, oh, she was over there, or he was with her, what the hell, what? And these things might play on your mind. So the couple, they were actually really impressed and fascinated with that opinion, and they went with it. They said that's what we want. They said, wow. And this was a testimony to, on the spot, the kind of engineered, highly innovative, engineered ijtihad of Imam Abu Hanifa. So it's just so, there's so many stories like that. But I'll tell you something. I'll move on towards in wrapping this up. But you see, the thing about Imam Abu Hanifa, he had his ilmi side to him. One may say he had a social, like a political side. If you want to say political or a stature, he was known by the caliph. He was, he stood with Imam Zayd. Well, when I say stood, as in he was in solidarity with him, he got in trouble. Then in the time of Imam Muhammad Nafs Zakiyah, which is another Ahlul Bayt movement from the family of the Prophet, which arose in Medina, and he stood in defense with him, because Imam Muhammad Nafs Zakiyah had a brother in Kufa, I believe Ibrahim, who Abu Hanifa was extending his solidarity to. And this is why he was punished and put in prison. And then eventually he died, or arguably was poisoned in prison by the caliph, or by, the politics of the time. So he had this side where he took these stances, and he had this innovative ijtihad side, and this spirit of Islam, and making Islam easy for people, and trying to, all of this. And he had the criticism. But the thing about Imam Abu Hanifa, one of that really stands out, was his compassion for people. This is what really won the hearts of so many people around him, was his compassion. He would spend money on people, because he was very wealthy. Allah, blessed him with rizq. He would spend money on his students, on his teachers, on people. He would, if he found out somebody was struggling with something, he would try to go, and somebody's struggling to get their child married and they don't have the funds, he would go and fund it. He would do so much where he could just help people, just bring a smile to their face. This is the really the winning feature of Imam Abu Hanifa, that really makes his legacy glow. And he there's several incidents. There's an incident where somebody used to attend his study circle, and always dressed like, dressed a bit like a tramp, let's say. Dressed really like he's impoverished. So this one time when the class is over, not in front of the rest of the people, Imam Abu Hanifa asks him to stay behind. He says, hang back a little while. So he does. Everybody goes. He says to him, look, come here. And he moves this. He has this bag. He opens it. And Imam Abu Hanifa's got this purse of gold pieces in there, of dinars. He says to him, take this and buy yourself some good clothes. And the person looks at Imam Abu Hanifa and says, oh no, completely misread me. He says, I'm actually quite well to do. He says, Allah has blessed me. He says, I appreciate what you're doing, but he says, I've actually got money. Then Imam Abu Hanifa looked at him and he said, because the person in Arabic said, look, Allah has already given his blessings, his ni'mas to me, meaning I've got money. Then Imam Abu Hanifa said to him, then where are the signs of his ni'mah upon you? Aina atharu ni'matihi alayk? He said, if Allah has gifted you with rizq, then dress well. So let it be known, amma bi ni'mati rabbika fahaddith. Not in a boastful way, but don't appear as though you are, like in this like homeless kind of state almost. And by the way, I'm not speaking about, I know in Islam there is a tradition of the mystic wanderers, like the great disheveled kind of wandering mystics, the great Sufis and the great, who, I don't mean them, who just became hermits and just adopted. They had a way of their own. But this is for people who are living in just being part of society, but they've got the blessings from Allah, but they're not adopting them. They're acting as though, they're struggling, or they're making it look like that. So this was an amazing side of his, that look, how he was trying to intervene and help, and there's I think I've shared this. I have shared this story before. I'll share it again. There was a neighbor in I don't know whether this was in Baghdad or in Kufa, because it might have been in Baghdad as well, because Imam Abu Hanifa was there for a little while as well. Now, because he was, the supervising kind of manager as well for the project when they were constructing the city. Now, he had a neighbor who really disliked religious people, couldn't stand them. You get some of those people. You get, unfortunately, some people, religious people like that as well. where they've found religion yet not found it. But you get other people as well that hate religion sometimes. They hate anybody to do with religion. And so this person was a Muslim. He was a Muslim, but he just hated. He felt they're just religious. They're just judgmental bigots. One may say some of that hasn't changed in some people. And he was a neighbor of Imam Abu Hanifa. Incessant alcoholic. See, this is another thing, that those people who think that day and age was like some kind of, I don't know, like Taliban kind of era. It was never like that. People always just had people weren't as involved in judging. Like maybe they judged, but they weren't as involved in being able to stop. Like people think Amr bil Ma'ruf and all this. It wasn't like that. People just did what they did. And sure, maybe people frowned on it, maybe people judged them, but they didn't have this like, people would stop you, or people would. This is back then in the Tabi'een's time. So you've got Imam Abu Hanifa's neighbor was a known drunkard, alcoholic, and he, not only that, he would sit out at nighttime outside on his kind of ledge. He would sit out at the front of his house and he would sing. Kya baat hai, raat ko this bhoot would awaken in him. So he'd think like, since I'm awake, I might as well keep everyone awake. And he would sing. And he would often, he would sing this poem that أضاعوني وأي فتى أضاعوا ليوم كريهة وسداد ثغري. That he said that they wasted me. They let a guy like me go to ruin. Kya baat hai, like me. They let a guy like me go to ruin. For what? They just wanted me to be a number in an army, just to fill a gap on a military field. Like basically, they just want some military expansion, so we just need people like cannon fodder. Like we'll just waste them. So he says, like, what he's saying is, I'm so much greater than this. And these people have wasted, they haven't recognized the value in me. He would sing this every night. And different songs as well, but this poetry, but this often. He go, "Allahuni, ayya fatan ada'u." And you know, Imam Abu Hanifa, and Imam Abu Hanifa is his neighbor. And by the way, Imam Abu Hanifa is who? He's an Imam, well known. Did Imam Abu Hanifa land at his yard, Amar bil Ma'ruf, Nahi anil Munkar, Shurb al Khamar, drinking alcohol is haram, grab him, beat him up? No. Did Imam Abu Hanifa used to say we need to stop, change the Ghir al Munkar bil? Could have Imam Abu Hanifa had that done easily? I mean, he's the Imam. He's the Caliph has been begging him to take up the job as the chief judge. And Imam Abu Hanifa's refused. This is how much authority he would wield. So how he could easily get him kind of and taught a lesson, and what's this alcohol? No neighbor of mine should be drinking alcohol. No. You know, the neighbor has so many hukuk in Islam. And here, to be fair, the neighbor's in the wrong because he's oppressing you, disturbing your peace. But yet, from Imam Abu Hanifa's character, he's going out of he's, you know what, to be fair, if he was to call the local shurta police to say, you better shut him up because he's disturbing the peace at night, he was in his right to do so because he's a neighbor and it's disturbing. But still, no. Just smiles. And that guy can't stand Imam. That guy's like, I can't stand these religious folk. They're just hypocrites. What happens one day, this guy gets into trouble with the authorities. As often, you know, the trouble would often be not far behind them. He gets arrested. So what happens is one night, Imam Abu Hanifa realizes, yeah, it's been awfully quiet since the past couple of days. How come the neighbor's not singing? So he thinks, you know what, in the morning, I'll just check up on him. Goes to check up, the guy's not there. So he asks about, he says, you know, I've not seen him around. It's been a few days now. They say, oh, him. So yeah, he's been taken away by the local shurta, the authorities, and they've got him in a cell. Imam Abu Hanifa turns up at the local shurta. What would have been there, you know, like a primitive police station in that day and age. Not just, this is a celebrity of a figure turning up. He turns up. And the local shurti is like, what the hell? What's Bayar? Am I in trouble? What's going on? So he says, can I help you? And he says, I've come here to ask for a favor. He says that, what's the favor? He says that I hear that such and such has been arrested. They say, yeah. He says, over what? They say, like, you know, he did some, it wasn't a major issue, some kind of delinquency he did, and we've banged him up. He's a waste anyway. Imam Abu Hanifa says, could you do a favor and release him and allow me to take some responsibility for him? So they're really surprised. What the hell? For that guy's just a waste of space. Of course, they say, of course, you know, if you want to take him, you could take him, but he's a waste of space. And they release the person, and he comes out, and as he's walking out, he sees Imam Abu Hanifa, and he's absolutely confused. What? Him? And Imam Abu Hanifa says to him, he says, Ya Fata, a young man. Fata is a young man. He says, Hal ada'nak. Did we let you go to waste? Allah. Kya baat hai. You know, honestly, this is it, isn't it? You know, these people, legends, he says to him that did we hal ada'nak, that did we let you go to waste? أحسن إلى الناس تستعبد قلوبهم فلطالما استعبد الإنسان إحسان. Allah, that that you do kindness to people, it conquers the hearts. This person was he had like an existential profound moment. Honestly, they say he felt so embarrassed in his way, in that he radically transformed his life, and he was so indebted, and it just hit him, the sincerity and the compassion, that this guy came to save me. It's like that, me, like, what the hell, and this guy who I used to always annoy. So it's amazing, wallahi. These people, these are the heroes and legends of Islam, that we learn about them in an attempt to inspire us. And there's a poem that Asamiyu lam tazidhu ma'arifatan innama ladhatan dhakarna. Allah. He says, Asami, these are titles that don't increase them in anything, like they don't benefit them. Innama ladhatan dhakarna. We mention them so we may find some pleasure in it. Maza chaska. This is honestly, there's wow. So these were, the stories of Imam, and there's so many funny stories as well about Imam Abu Hanifa, and I wanted to share it because I thought, look, he passes away in 150 Hijri. He's buried in Baghdad. He's buried in Baghdad, I believe, and there is a site that's set up, a structure with Imam Abu Hanifa's tomb. In the same year that he passes away, Imam Shafi'i is born. So, wow, just what a thing. There's I'll leave you guys with another little story. I don't know whether this one, some of these stories, we see them, we don't know how people transmit them, we don't know how accurate they are. But khair, they say that this one time Imam Abu Hanifa was because he was working, doing his thing, and his Imam thing, that he used to like have a clinic, if you like. People would come, and he's doing that, and this woman comes in, and she takes off her hijab and stuff. She comes in like she's got clothes on, but she's taken all her hijab off, and very kind of like showing how she is, glamorous hair, all this kind. So Imam Abu Hanifa, he looks at her, and she's very pretty, very beautiful, and he says to her that, look, please, like, put that back on, please, because obviously, because he's the only one there, and there could be a scandal, man. This scandal, you can't handle the scandal, So he says, look, don't. He says, it's please. He says, put it back on, and she says, no, it's important because it's part of what I'm about to ask you. She says it's important you can see me and my looks. So anyway, she sits and she starts talking, introducing herself, being very friendly, being very polite, being very decent. And so she says, look, I've got an issue. She says, it's a bit embarrassing, but I'd like to say that, look, I want to get married. And she says that every time I'm about to marry, my father, who, she says, there's that at the bottom of the street, around the corner, whatever, there's this grocery store, these greengrocers. So he says, yeah, they call it baqal in Arabic. He says, yeah, she says, I'm his daughter. So he says, okay. He says, look, what it is I'm going to be honest with you. I want to get married. I want to, and every time some suitor comes and asks for my hand, my dad always says, let me tell you before, because, you probably haven't seen her. She's cross-eyed, and she's got learning difficulties, and she's what is it? I think she's kind of hunched over or stuff like this. So basically a bunch of disabilities, and so the guys always turn away, and so I've got nobody to marry. And so she starts talking, says, look, I've reached a certain age, and so this is how the story goes. Allahu A'lam, how true it is. So she says to the Imam, look, if she says, look, I'd want to get married. So she says, look, if you wouldn't mind, would you marry me? So Imam Hanifa says, yeah, what is this problem, man? Why this? So he's, first he's not. And she says, look, come on, look, this is why I thought it's important that you see me. I'm reasonable, there's nothing wrong, I can do this, I can do that, I'm very understanding, in that day and age as well, polygamous marriages, the days when men were men. Have to be careful, yeah. Cancel culture. Cancel. I'm joking. In that day and age where polygamous relationships were more the norm, so especially within Muslim environments. So Imam Abu Hanifa says, look, and then he says, you know what? She says, look, come on, look, if there's anything wrong, you can see, look, I'll serve you, I'll do this, I'm very decent, I'm educated, I'm like this. So he says, look, so he thinks about it. He says, okay. He says, fine. If that's what you want, he says, fine. He says, I don't object. I'll take you as a wife. So she says, okay. She says, but you've got to come and propose, to my father. You got to ask for my hand, not here right now like this. You come tomorrow or something, come to the greengrocers and ask for my hand. So he says, chalo, theek hai. So Imam Hanifa goes the next day, and he says to the greengrocer, he says, look, listen, he says, I've come to ask for your daughter's hand. So he says, okay. He says, but I better be open with you. She's cross-eyed and she's got learning difficulties and she's a bit kind of like, I think, hunched over. And so he says, yeah. He says, chalo, Allah malik hai, Allah, he says, no problem. It's not a problem. Theek hai, we'll do the nikah. He says, okay. So the father-in-law says, look, I've accepted, and you can, when do you want to do this nikah? So we can do this nikah. Fine, let's exchange. So in that day and age, they just say, look, let's get some of these people together. We're going to do this, few witnesses, and he's the Imam, and it's known. Theek hai, they would just, because marriages were quite simple. This is another thing as well, that the more complex, there's a hadith that the khairul nikahi barakatan aysaruha ma'unatan. Those nikahs that are the most simple have the most barakah and blessing. So in that day and age, they were very simple kind of nikah. So Tika, he goes, they say, that's your wife's in this room. She's going to be getting ready. You can come, speak to her, collect her. She can go with. So he comes in the afternoon, he comes back and goes in the room. The woman in the room is cross-eyed and hunchback with learning difficulties. So Imam was like, what? Who the hell's this? He says, he goes out and he says to the father that, what? He says, that's not your daughter. He goes, that's her. I told you, she's cross-eyed and she's hunchback and she's got these, I told you that's what. And he says, no, look, there's been this terrible misunderstanding. He says, yeah, mistake. He says, look, I can't, I'm ever so sorry. I will, all these expenses that I said that I would pay, you can have that money, but sorry, I can't keep this nikah. So they say, okay, fine. So they just, he says, look, consider it a talaq, but I'll pay for these expenses. I'll do all of that. That's fine. And he goes. Now, a week or two later, that first woman comes to visit Imam Abu Hanifa again. So she comes to see the Imam, and Imam Abu Hanifa looks at her and he says, "You?" She says, "Aha, me." And she says, "How do you feel?" And he says that that wasn't right what you did. She goes, "Really?" And she says, "Well, I hope you feel I did that to get you back." And he says, "To get me back for what?" And she says that, "Look, a man came and proposed to our family before, and he needed a reference. Like, in that day and age, people would say, can I ask an Imam? And can you ask somebody vouch for you? Is he a decent guy? How is his wealth?" And she said everything was okay with him, but his financial condition was a bit poor. He wasn't totally impoverished, he was a bit poor. So he was worried that, and he came to you saying, "Do you remember the case?" So Imam Abu Hanifa remembered the case, that there was a time this man came and he'd found a nice match, and he was a great guy, but he was just a bit poor. And the family, if he said to them he was a bit poor, they would have refused the nikah. So he asked Imam Abu Hanifa, "Could you be my witness? Like, could you kind of like vouch for me?" So Imam Abu Hanifa said to him that, he said that they won't marry me because I'm a bit poor and blah, blah, blah. So Imam Abu Hanifa said to him, this is what the story goes. He said to him, "Okay, would you sell a limb of yours to me right now for 12,000 dinars? If I was to say, sell me your hand or your arm or would you, 12,000 gold pieces?" And the guy said, "No." He said, "Seriously?" He said, "No." He said, "Good." He said, "Don't worry. Look, when can I'll go you get ready for the nikah." And he went to see the people as a reference, and he said, "Oh yeah, yeah, I've met the person." And they said, "How is his financial condition?" He said, "Look, Allah provides. All I can say is the man was offered 12,000 dinars for a 12,000 gold pieces for a transaction, and he turned it down in front of me. That's all I can say." So they thought, "Wow, he must be, very wealthy, So they did the nikah. So this was the woman that was married to him. So she said that, to be fair, he's a great guy, but I felt duped about his financial situation, and you misrepresented it. So I wanted you to get you back on that." They say that Imam Abu Hanifa said that, "Look, you misunderstood me. I wasn't trying to misrepresent him. I was just trying to help him in getting a nikah, and I wasn't trying to con someone. I was just trying to, he was a good person, and he had a great heart, and he would make a great husband. And you shouldn't have just been turned down for money. That's all." But Allahu A'lam whether that story was true, but it was a fascinating read, I tell you that. So guys, that was this legend of an Imam who really just left us so much to think about. They say, when he was asked about Imam Malik, "What do you think of him?" After he met him, he went back to Iraq. They said, what do you think of Imam Malik?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "Ra'aytul ghulam al-ashqar." See, Imam Malik was blonde. He was blonde with blue eyes. So he says, "Yes, I saw the blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy." Lad. He calls him a lad, like a young lad, because he's younger. Imam Malik's like at least 12, 13 years younger than him. He says, "I saw that young blue-eyed, blonde-haired lad." And then back then, blonde hair and blue eye was a bit odd, because most obviously in the Middle East and that, they're not really going to be blonde haired. So Imam Malik was, and so it was a bit odd. So people always saw it as an oddity about it. Like today, I suppose, maybe with glamour and Hollywood, it's got more of a thing to it. But back then, people didn't really, it had no appeal factor to it. So yeah, that was his comment. He said, "Yeah," he said, "I met that boy, that lad." But yeah, but there was a great, yeah, they were, they had this, they left a legacy. Allah. and their madhabs live on. And it is something to whichever madhab a person chooses, but to really learn. And it doesn't. I suppose the thing about the Hanafi madhab is it became very restrictive and controlling. Some people didn't, like you get like scholars like Shrumbul Ali and other people who believed that taqleed was still open, and you didn't have to blindly follow. But the madhab did become quite regimental, especially in the latter centuries, the last maybe 200, 300 years. Whereas some of the other madhabs still kept their freedoms. I mean, some people became regimental, but others, it wasn't all. Like the Maliki madhab still kept its kind of freedoms and stuff as well. So, but may Allah bless this legacy and really inspire us to learn. Guys, I want to share that with you. I hope it was of some significance.